Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Simone Zoppellaro. He's an Italian journalist, researcher, and photojournalist. He earned his degree in foreign languages and literature at the University of Bologna, writing a thesis on Ralph Waldo Emerson and medieval Persian poetry. After his studies, he spent 6 years living and working between Iran and Armenia, a period that shaped his deep interest in the Caucasus and post-Soviet political dynamics. He has contributed to numerous major Italian magazines and newspapers and regularly publishes investigative reports and features on the Caucasus, Middle East, and human rights issues. Simone is also an author. Among his books are Armenia Today, The Struggles and Challenges of a Living Nation. I think that was correctly translated from the Italian, Simone, yes?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. And The Genocide of the Yazidis. These were published in 2016 and 2017, respectively. In addition to his journalistic work, he engages as a researcher focused on themes of memory, disinformation, and human rights, contributing to broader discussions about history, conflict, and democracy. Thank you for being with us, Simone.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Simone's investigative work sheds light on how Azerbaijan has engaged the Vatican and Italy in ways that go far beyond soft power. So let's begin by unpacking what he has discovered. Simone, if I may ask, if I can start with asking a question, about Azerbaijan's influence campaign at the Vatican. Your work has shown how the Vatican has developed unusually close ties with Azerbaijan. We consider it unusual, at least from an outsider's point of view. You may actually debunk that perception. And this has happened even as questions about human rights and cultural destruction remain unresolved. What, in your view, has driven this deepening of this relationship with the Holy See? Please.
So let's take the perspective of the Vatican. What is the Vatican interest in Azerbaijan? I would say two major points that are objective. First of all, they're finding a diplomatic space. The Catholic Church is not the Catholic Church of 50 years ago or centuries ago. It's still relevant, of course. We see it nowadays, but it's losing ground on a diplomatic level. And Azerbaijan and other post-Soviet states gave them a stage, a possibility to move and to expand their influence in a part of the world, of course, that was impossible to reach for them for many decades. It is the former Soviet Union, but also finding new linkings that would connect them to Turkey, a country that is always not so easy to deal with the Vatican, despite the recent travel of the Pope to Turkey. And this fact. Another fact is, I recollect in my investigations, a big number of projects that were sponsored by the Ali Foundation in the Vatican. Churches, restorations, libraries, frescoes, sculptures, huge number. And I could also expand with a couple of other projects, also what I wrote, because I found some other things. And the Halia Foundation gave a financial support that we can't exactly quantify, and I also can tell you technically why later. But of course, that's also another issue. This year, for the first time in many years, the Vatican had a positive financial outcome. That is something that didn't happen for many years, but for sure is not a good financial period. And of course, having a state like Azerbaijan that is willing to invest money is something that is positive. And this is from the perspective of the Vatican. From the perspective of Azerbaijan, it's pretty clear, I think. They're looking for a legitimation. First of all, as a so-called open country, religious tolerance, peace, the relationship with the Vatican, it's very important for their narrative. They want to promote this narrative. We are very open, we respect all religions, we are for peace. And it's what they're asking to the Vatican. That's very clear. And in part, the Vatican is going on this direction. If we take the fact, for example, that Mehriban Alieva, the Vice President of Azerbaijan, received the highest prize of the Vatican a few years ago. We understand how deep this relationship was developed and how significant also is for both sides, probably mostly for Azerbaijan, but also from the Vatican side.
You mentioned that it's the quantitative relationship, the transactions, the donations. It's not that clear. It's not that transparent. It's a bit opaque. What is our understanding?
Oh, it's very technical. It's very simple.
Yeah.
The Vatican is not a church like the other church. It's a state, and that's fundamental. So, for example, if these donations from the Alif Foundation would occur in Italy or in Germany, where I live, it will be very easy because they should make public state, democracy, what they received. But the Vatican is not transparent at all. I've asked to the Vatican, we have asked to the Vatican to explain how much money they got, but being a state, they are not transparent at all, and they will never technically be forced to do it. So we don't have an amount of money. We had just some traces of a few €100,000, but that's certainly a small part of it. We could speculate it is much more, most probably it's much more, but we can't know how much is it. And this, of course, it's part of the story because they declare publicly that they make these projects, they announce, they make press release and everything, but they don't declare how much money is that. And that's very problematic from an ethical point of view. But they sell it, also from that perspective, as a collaboration for peace, dialogue between religions, and that's the narrative they try to promote from their sides. But it's not ethical at all.
Do you come across individuals that feel uncomfortable with this relationship? Are there dissenting voices that you've come across?
Absolutely, and that's very important to say also. I want also to say that I don't want to sound offensive for anyone. I know how much religion is important, I understand, and that's also a very important point. In the Catholic Church, there's a lot of beautiful people inside. And also many persons, including Armenians, are not Catholic Armenians, I say, they are not comfortable with this relationship. And I saw it especially during the Second Karabakh War. That's very, very clear. Major figures of the Catholic Church from the Armenian side didn't feel comfortable seeing the way the Vatican reacted to the ethnic cleansing, and after that also to the destruction and the rebranding, let's say, of the Armenian monuments that are now sold like not being Armenian. And that's something that we should absolutely consider. On the horizontal point of level, we should speak, I think, about two levels about the Catholic Church. We have a vertical point of view and we have a horizontal point of view. In the base of the Catholic Church, you have many different voices, and I think also many positive and empathetic figures and associations towards the Armenians, especially in that period. And we saw it also in Italy. But we have also a vertical point of view because, again, as a state, and it is a state, it's a vertical state with a clear hierarchy, with the Pope, with cardinals, and on that level, we saw a direction that was not exactly sympathetic to Armenia, and that's also objective, I would say, because the number of declarations we had during Second Karabakh War and also after were very weak, not so sympathetic from those cardinals and the Pope. Although we had some declarations, but it was not something that was meant to affect or to influence the diplomacy, and that was very clear, I would say.
You mentioned cardinals, and in your writings, there's one cardinal, Gugerotti, that appears quite often. What can you tell us about him?
It's a very interesting figure because it's a very cultivated person. He knows Armenian, he knows very well Armenian. He's also an historian. He wrote publications and books about Armenian culture that are respected and also read and commented by many Armenians. influence. On the other hand, he is an ambitious diplomat, and his ambition is very clear in his biography. Since he was very young as a priest, he was always very ambitious, and now he is the representative of the Catholic Church for the Eastern churches. And this figure was also we say nuncio in Italian, the ambassador basically of the Vatican in the South Caucasus for many years. And this person that is certainly a very cultivated person, and a person also that has a real interest, I would say, in Armenian history and culture. We don't have to omit that. But is also a figure that was, in many cases, chosen by the Vatican to interact with autocracies, and not only about Azerbaijan. He's often there in the high meetings, and he was also there when they created this relationship. I mean, he was in the Caucasus in the period when they created and they started to develop this very strong relationship between Baku and the Holy See. But also with Belarus, he met twice Alexander Lukashenko, very recently, the last meeting with the Belarus dictator for releasing two priests that were in the Belarus prisons. And also with Russia, because he was the figure that was chosen, the first one that was chosen by Pope Francis in the period in which we were discussing about a meeting between the Vatican and Vladimir Putin himself. After that, we know, because it went public, that Ukrainians were protesting because they consider Gugerotti to be too much close to the Russian regime. But this figure appears also that he's a very influential diplomat. He's one of the most influential diplomats the Vatican has. He's a very clever person. I would say he's a very cynical person, but we don't have, I think, to think that he is looking for something illegal. We don't have any proof of that. He is a person that has an idea of his own state and church, and he thinks that the dialogue with autocracies is part of the role of the historical mission role of the church, and it's also part of a tentative to expand the influence, the political influence of this church. So if I might try to make a portrait of this very complicated also figure, I think I will start with this.
And his portfolio consists of at least Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Russia, we think?
Yes, but he was also ambassador in England, so he has also a relationship that are also in Europe, at least. But when we speak about post-Soviet countries, it seems that he's the most influent person in the Vatican. And these very high-level meetings we had, I think, can prove it. And he made also recently interviews about that, also commenting on the Vatican media his meeting with Lukashenko. He says it's very useful to meet with figures like Lukashenko. And it's our duty, he says us, to make dialogue, to try to create bridge in this period of war. I understand this perspective, but it's also clear, and I think he is not so naive that he doesn't understand, he understands it very well, that it has also a price, and the price is a kind of whitewashing. We can easily define that he is doing on the Aliyev regime, on Lukashenko himself, and he couldn't do it, but probably in his ambition also is Vladimir Putin himself. And that's a very dangerous game. Maybe not for the Vatican, but for sure it's a very dangerous game for Europe in this moment, to have the most influential church of Europe that is making this kind of operations, finding new ways to penetrate. They are penetrating also without the Catholic Church now. They're very influential. Also in Italy, we have a lot of operations of Russia also in the last days. They're very influential there. They don't need the Vatican to penetrate Italy. I mean, Azerbaijan and Russia, let's speak about these two, for example. But the Vatican is creating new ways. And this is a big problem for our democracies that are getting weaker and weaker now.
So these bridges, to focus on the bridge, analogy a little bit. So is the Vatican, is the church like crossing into complicity? We think. Can that argument be made? Yes. I mean, if they are whitewashing, if
Yes,
they're
indirectly for
legitimizing,
sure. Indirectly for sure. Legitimizing, yes. Yes, complicity, we could say that, and also is what I felt very often during the Second World War, the Second Karabakh War. All this silence, it has a price, of course. We could think that a church has a moral duty, also a church uh, has a moral duty to try to protect the human rights of a population that is being erased and was very violent, was brutal. They were suffering hunger before being erased. And this silence has a political price and a practical price. The Armenians were also a victim of this silence. That was certainly not only the silence of the Vatican, it was the silence of many European countries, and not only, but it was also the silence of the Vatican. So, yes, we could say yes, there is a complicity for sure.
and what is Gugerotti's relationship with Armenian Catholic clergy? Does he have any connection, responsibility? If he is responsible for Eastern Catholic churches, if I'm labeling it correctly,
Yes.
is there an
Yes.
element of God within the church's governance structure? Does he have a role with regard to the Armenian Catholic communities?
Yes, he's a prefetto per le Chiese Orientali, so he is responsible for the Oriental churches, including the Catholic Armenian Church and other churches of the Middle East, for example, and he's responsible for that. And what's very interesting is that it happened recently, a couple of months ago. He had a huge conflict with the patriarch of the Catholic Armenians, Minassian, that I also interviewed and met in Yerevan. And there was a very violent political conflict in which, according to Valeria Giansoldati, that is one of the best journalists we have in Italy about the Vatican, he tried to replace the head of the Armenian Catholic Church. So, yes, there is a conflict, and not only from him. I heard also from other Catholic Armenians that there are problems. There are problems in Venice, for example, because of Venice, there are many places that are owned by the Catholic Church that are Armenians. There are conflicts there, and there are conflicts on many levels in this time. So, yes, as I told you, there is this vertical dimension, but there is also this horizontal dimension. And there are many different voices about this, definitely.
Excellent. Thank you. With regard to the Vatican and Baku's Western Azerbaijan agenda, have we seen any of this discourse enter the Vatican's the Vatican's narrative at all? Is there any sense of that in terms of which gives us indication of perhaps how aggressive and how deep this relationship is? You know.
Yes, about the so-called
Yeah.
Western Azerbaijan, I
Yes.
didn't see much, but we saw different operations on another level that is also very dangerous. That is the one of the rebranding of Armenian monuments as Albanian in Karabakh. And on that level, we saw, for example, there was an exhibition in Warsaw, there was a conference in Rome, and there was also promotion of publications that were going on that direction. And it is something that hurted also many Catholics, and that produced also protest also from the academic point of view. We saw, I remember some months ago, a document was signed by many, many, many professors of Armenian studies in Europe that were protesting on that. So this is a dangerous game that Azerbaijan, probably with the help also with some helps in Russia, is trying to promote in Europe, and the Vatican, a part of the Vatican, is giving space to that narrative. And that narrative is very, very dangerous because not only we had an ethnic cleansing in Karabakh, but we have also the duty to try to protect an heritage that is now threatened, like the lives of many Armenians that were sent away from their land. It's a very sad story also because I've spent some months in Karabakh and I understand how much they are suffering now because to lose your land, to lose your monuments, to lose your cemeteries is a very painful one. In the silence of the Vatican, it was not total silence, but it was almost complete silence on that. Of course, it's hurting many persons. I understand it very well. They're right to be hurt.
Okay. We do have a question with regard to other individuals that are involved in this ecosystem, Parolin and Gallagher.
Yes, yes,
Who
for
are
sure.
they? Who are they? What is their role?
Yes, there are other figures of cardinals that appear very often in these meetings, of course, not only Gugerotti, and there are high-level diplomats again. On a high level, we can find many figures that are working on that direction. Again, if we think on a vertical point of view, with the Pope and the cardinals that are taking decisions, we find a unity on that. I mean, it's a strategy. Their relationship with Azerbaijan is nothing naive, is not part of an improvisation. It's part of a long strategy. And of course, we don't have just a figure like Gugerotti, these diplomats. We have the decisions of many that go in that direction. We could also speak about the popes themselves. Pope Francis also was for sure going on this direction and promoting this relationship. If not, the Mehriban Alieva wouldn't have taken the biggest prize from the Vatican in that period. And there were meetings between Alieva and Pope Francis. Alieva and also the recent Pope received Alieva, and they are continuing also now to make projects with the Aliyev Foundation. So we could speak about many figures, but it is a decision, a vertical decision of the Vatican that goes in that direction. They want it, and they didn't give any clear sign of changing that direction, despite of the fact that, of course, many Catholics, and not only Armenians, are not comfortable with this. And that's clear, because I made a lot of interviews inside of the Vatican of people that are informed, Catholic persons that also are part of this church, and they don't feel comfortable in this, and they protest it. But again, it's a diplomatic decision. It's a strategy also, we can say about the Vatican. And this is not going to change any soon, I
think. Okay. By the way, this last question came from Archbishop Vikan Kazian. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Surpazan, for your question. So, with regard to Italy, let's say, and Italy's expanding role, it seems that Azerbaijan and Italy have also developed a closer relationship where soft power, cultural, power, as well as economic leverage have come together. And now Italy is also sort of, could we say that Italy is also part of a gateway, a strategic gateway for Azeri ambitions in Europe? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very clear. And it's 11 years that I'm following South Caucasus politics, and I'm writing about that. And I could see how constantly Azerbaijan diplomacy is working on Italy and the Vatican, step by step, very carefully, with a lot of attention, with a lot of investments. And the result is there now. It's a huge work that they did, starting from a lower level, increasing the level of the figure that they can, I wouldn't say control, but at least have a dialogue with. Now they can speak with the Italian government on the highest level, 10 years ago, it was not like that. They were investing on figures on a lower level, small politicians, cultural persons, and stuff. And yes, Azerbaijan and Italy have a very close relationship, and Italy is fundamental for Azerbaijan. It's a fact of number. I mean, if we say, for example, that 57% of the export of oil of Azerbaijan, 57 goes just to Italy, 20% of gas, over 30% of the export of Azerbaijan goes to Italy, and it's increasing. We have this trans-Adriatic pipeline that takes the gas of Azerbaijan into Apulia in the south of Italy. And this is also increasing because they are thinking to expand the volume of gas in the following years that will go through this channel. And it's fundamental. Italy is fundamental for Azerbaijan. It is the first country that in Europe, for sure, in the European Union now, that they can influence, that they can have such a strong relationship. And it's a very big problem for us, I think. And this was naive. I think that Italy was naive in developing this strategy. I understand very well after the full scale of invasion of Ukraine. Of course, everything has changed. We couldn't be Italy like Germany was buying a lot of energy from Russia, of course, and this should change. But the fact that we are, again, fueling another autocracy, it's not only immoral against Armenians, because, of course, first point, it's immoral against Armenians, and we shouldn't forget, but it's also masochistic, because it's not a strategy. I can see a strategy in the Vatican, it's cynical, it's part of a long tradition of a church that has always been a state. It's not a normal church, it's also a state. And that their way to deal with things that we find maybe not so modern and very cynical. But from an Italian point of view, and also from a European point of view, because Italy is a big country, it has a huge impact economically and politically in Europe. It's a big problem now, because it's something that went out of control. And again, the fact that we let Azerbaijan have such a big, also political influence, because it's not only economic, political influence in Italy. It's something also that prepared and was parallel to the fact that Russia, for example, is penetrating, as I was saying before, Italy on many levels. It's the same story. We can't say we leave Russia, we go with Azerbaijan, it's different. It's always the fact that we are living with these contradictions, we are living fueling autocracies that are eating democracies, because we will not work to promote democracy in a moment in which democracies are getting weaker and weaker everywhere. Let's take Georgia, for example. Let's take many countries, Hungary. And this is something that I've criticized for many years, and I think it's a very bad strategy we had. And now it's kind of out of control because we are very dependent from Azerbaijan. They will not go back from it. Also, Armenians made, for sure, diplomatic mistakes, huge diplomatic mistake in the story, I think, because they invested for many years. It's something that many Armenians naturally can't know, but as an Italian, I can understand very well. Armenian diplomacy for many years, for the last 10 years, invested a lot on some part of Italian politics. This is the right part of politics. Some parties, for example, Matteo Salvini, the leader of the Lega Nord, that is now the vice premier of Italy, so the number 2 of the Italian government. He got a state prize, for example, from Armenia, and they invested a lot of that. When these parties went into power, they showed on numbers, that they were the most pro-Azeri one in Italian politics. And this was a very, very poor investment. I can't say that it's fault, but it was a wrong strategy. Azerbaijan developed a coherent, cynical, step-by-step strategy in Italy and the Vatican, and that worked. Armenia has made a very good work from some aspects, developing very good relationship with the different realities in Italy, with groups and stuff, but on a government level, they made mistakes. And now many Armenians in the last few years were very surprised. Why Salvini. Why these parties that we thought are very sympathetic with us because we are Christians, because they are conservative, now go on a very different directions because they didn't understand a country like Italy. It is not an easy country. It's a very cynical country. It's a country that is full of corruption. In this reason, it's very similar probably to post-Soviet countries, and that's also a reason we have this story probably. But it's a country that is very non-ideological in its approach to politics. We have Machiavelli, we have the country of Machiavelli, we have this kind of political thought, and you see it in the Vatican and you see it in Rome. We can't think they are naive. These guys are not naive. Maybe they made a mistake from Azerbaijan, not seeing a long perspective, and I say that, but what they say is not what they think, and that's very clear. And we saw it also in the case of Armenia and Azerbaijan very clearly. Now we have ministers of Italy, at least two of them that are very close to Baku. The relationships expanding day by day, we would say.
Mm-hmm. And how does this expanding relationship, or does it, present a danger to Italy?
In my opinion, yes. I told you why also, because again, cooperating so closely with the post-Soviet autocracy is something that is corroding our democracies. It's preparing the way for interactions that we have in Italy between Russia and Azerbaijan that find the same interest in many points of the agenda, working together. And it's something that is entering into a system, into a country that is a country with a huge problem with corruption and criminality. And that's a topic that, also speaking with other investigative journalists, we found often. When you speak about mafia in Italy, when you speak about post-Soviet countries, sometimes, and it's very difficult to track, but you see that there are interactions. And so, yes, that was a poor decision, I think. If they wanted to be cynical, they thought, but they thought the same for Putin, no? In Italy, also in Germany. For many years, we thought, now we make business with Putin. In any case, making business will avoid any conflict. We live in an open world. This will continue very easily. It will not affect our democracies because we're strong. They're weak. We can influence them. They can't influence us. For many years, I heard these stories. We have soft powers. They don't have soft power. And now we see the opposite because with their disinformation, they are entering, for example, the Italian culture is so much corrupted by Russia that is very almost unbelievable in my opinion, but some of the figures are the same that are promoting also Azerbaijan agenda, even on a cultural level. So I think there was really masochism. They wanted to be cynical, they wanted to have an alternative to Russian gas, and it was good, of course, in some way. But again, we are entering a situation that is just making us weaker, and that's very clear, I think.
And do you find that there, in your ecosystem, are there many journalists, policymakers who have a grasp in Rome of what's at stake here and the direction and the risks? And if so, in your discussions, do you get much resistance when you're presenting your point of view?
Oh, that's a very interesting question about that. We have a lot of persons in Italy that know this story. Why they're not speaking about that? Because two reasons at least. Let's start with two reasons. One is it's not a big story, the South Caucasus in Italy. It's not part of the big conflicts. It's not Palestine-Israel. It's not Russian-Ukraine. It's not something that you can develop as a career. We have to be also very practical. I mean, on another level, there is a fact that, as I told you, Azerbaijan is very influential in Italy. So, if you cover human rights issues about Azerbaijan, for example, you are constantly being attacked. And you will find many Italian newspapers, in many cultural centers problems because Azeri diplomacy is very active for every small event, every small article to try to put an obstacle. And they have a lot of experience and they can do it very well. I saw Azerbaijan attacking, for example, Amnesty International. With Amnesty International, some years ago, we made some events promoting human rights in Azerbaijan. And for every single event, even events in the school, for example, the Azeri embassy was writing letters to the school, and the schools were getting scared. We don't want this canceled, these conflicts in school. I mean, school is a protected environment. You have children, and they were canceling these events. So, yes, there is a huge penetration, and many persons, for this reason, they simply don't find it convenient to deal with this because you will not develop a career with that, you will not find much attention, you have bigger conflicts, but you have also easier conflicts. Because to be totally pro-Israel or totally pro-Palestine, especially in this very Manichaean system, is something that brings you an audience. Trying to work on a deeper level, seeing how not a huge country, maybe like Azerbaijan, is influential and working in Italy is not something that will become a big story. For these reasons, we don't have much about that. But many politicians, journalists, head of organizations are very well aware of this happening. And they're also worried about that. And they're worried, for example, that the gas is coming to Italy is partly Russian gas. That's also a big story. And one source I have in the government, a politician, told me that the government asked to the Italian secret services to make an inquiry about this point. Is the gas that we're receiving Azeri gas, Russian gas, a mix of that? They're worrying about this. So there is absolutely an awareness of a problem. But nobody's working at the moment to solve this problem, we could say.
Yes. In terms of developing some resilience, some deterrence, what can Armenians of good conscience, Italians of good conscience do in their engagement with, let's say, the Church, the Vatican, or the Italian authorities? How does one make it more costly for those who have a high tolerance for authoritarianism and the most ugly components of that to continue engaging? Because as you noted, as you beautifully noted, is that yes, bridges are being created, there's communication, there's channels, but it does seem that the West is being influenced more than the West is influencing, the authoritarian regimes in this case. So how does one, of course, your journalism helps. How do we further expand that? How do we engage more? Any thoughts? Any thoughts?
Yes, I agree with you. I remember, for example, Richard Kirakosian, that is an analyst I like
Mhm.
very much. I think it was more or less 10 years ago. He was saying that Russia has no soft power in the South Caucasus. And in the time, it was also true, I think. If we think about Georgia, for example, was traveling in Georgia 10 years ago. It was all the population was so much pro-Western. All of them were watching Europe, the US. It was something very important for them, for everyone. It was big enthusiasm, I could say, of being pro-Western. And Russia was not able to enter in that system. Now we see, I agree with you totally. Now we see a very big change in that. So we see an influence that is coming from autocracies into the West that is probably stronger than what we can do to influence that. And that's growing, that's a big factor. It's also a technical factor. Technologies, social medias are certainly a factor, but not only that. There are big contradictions. And also one reason that I think especially for the states. For Italy, Germany, let's take these two states, for example, it's not a good thing to expand the relationship with Azerbaijan. I mean, it's weakening our narrative. We pretend to be always the good guys that take always care of the human rights, and we are always on the good side of history. That's totally fake, I mean, but that's what we are promoting as democracies. How can we justify that continuing to deal with autocracies like Azerbaijan? It doesn't work. It's a contradiction. A country like Russia is promoting a narrative that is cynical. They're not saying we are the good guys. They're not saying we are perfect and stuff. Their narrative is more solid than ours now. Now our narrative is very fragile, full of contradictions, weakened. No, that's not good at all. To go to your question, I think it's a very good and difficult question because it's not easy to give an answer to that. But I think unity is a big point. It's also something that is making me sad, like person observing Armenia for 15 years. It's 15 years I'm going every year to Armenia. After the Second Karabakh War, I saw a very divided society, and I continue to see a very divided society. And that's something that makes me sad because this makes all the big enemies, because they are big, these enemies that Armenia has, stronger. And I think despite all the differences, that are also religious differences, unfortunately now also in Armenia, it's important to find a unity, not only for Armenia, for our societies in Italy, in Germany. We should find a unity inside our societies, and we should create positive bridges between our societies, like we are also doing today, trying to develop a dialogue and to say we are on the same side of history. It is not the perfect guys. No, none of us is perfect, probably, but we are really trying to save our future, the democracy, and the possibility to choose our future, because it's that we are risking to lose. Armenia, of course, is on the front line of that. I understand that it's very risky for Armenia. They can lose their future very easily because now this division is splitting the society, and the neighbors are very aggressive and very strong. But also for Europe, we should be able to create a different environment, because if we continue to fight against ourselves, we will not have many chances. And we really need now unity and to find a synthesis that I believe there is. Our future, the possibility to choose our future. That's something that we should do, absolutely.
Thank you, Simone. Simone, you mentioned, and this is a question that's being also coming up from the audience, with regard to the lack of unity, the fragmentation, the fractures we're seeing right now in Armenian society, which is being exasperated by the prosecution of Armenian clergy. Do we think at all that the Catholic Church or Azerbaijan as a role, is playing a role or influencing this dynamic?
Absolutely.
Is there any sign of it?
Absolutely. I think they are divide and rule. It's a very old strategy that Romans were promoting to conquer new territories, and that the British Empire was promoting too in their colonies. You divide and rule.
Okay.
So absolutely, yes. If I might take another historical example, let's take Italy. In the middle of the 19th century, when Italy was created, it was created with a huge conflict of the Catholic Church, between the church and the state. It's not something that outside Italy is very often discussed, but it's fundamental for history.
Yes.
Because Italy destroyed the state of the Vatican, that was reduced to a quarter of Rome, and the Catholic Church said, we don't recognize at all the Italian state. And this is a period that continued until fascism. It was Benito Mussolini that found, for the first time in the history of the Italian state, it is a recent state, our history is maybe long, but the state is young.
Mm-hmm.
He found a collaboration with the Catholic Church that took to a dictatorship. And that's something that when I think about Armenia in this moment, I'm afraid that something like that could happen. Because if you divide, again, a society, also on something that is very sensitive, because I respect religious persons. It's very important for their identity. It's not something that is, what I like, which product I like. It's something that is part of their soul. And when you start to hurt that part of a person, this person become aggressive. And we saw it in Italy because Italian democracy was fucked for the first time, sorry for the word, but also because we weren't able to find a solution and the state was very aggressive against the church and the church was very aggressive against the state. And that's something that is always very dangerous, I think.
May I ask you about the Russian Orthodox Church and its relationship with Baku and its the strategic component to that relationship?
Oh, that's another next. Please, sorry.
No, please, please go ahead.
I'm not an expert about that. I can't tell you exactly what is the strategy of the Orthodox Church, although I could say something about the Orthodox Church and the Vatican. That's also very interesting, but that's another topic. About that, yes, there are moments and which we saw a common narrative. As I told you before, for the narrative of the Albanian churches in Karabakh, for that. There are scholars, Russian scholars, that are denounced by other scholars, that are trying to promote with publications, books, articles, and also with conferences, and also, unfortunately, in some controversies that took place inside the Vatican, in the official university in Rome of the Vatican, that are trying to promote this narrative. And in this, I spoke with some experts that are real experts like me on the history of the Orthodox Church and its relationship that told me, yes, this is a part of a strategy. The Orthodox Church is collaborating to promote this narrative because they have their own interest and they are trying to promote something together. So yes, in my experience, I saw moments that took to that direction, and yes, I think that's likely to have a scenario like that. Also, we could speak about the penetration of the relationship between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Vatican. But again, there are documents that speak. It's not important what I think. If we take the document that Pope Francis and the Patriarch Kirill signed in Cuba between the two churches, it's a document. It is, go and read it online. I quote it very often also because it's a document. If you go and read these points, you see how also these points are political. And this is part of a strategy of both churches that was before 2022. That's true. But it's part of a strategy that these two churches are promoting until now. Now, with more difficulties, of course, because the full-scale invasion made much more difficult to go in that direction. But, I mean, I told you a few days ago, this cardinal met with Lukashenko. So they didn't put aside this strategy. It's still part of a project that it's for sure considered. So yes, there are many movements also in the direction of the churches that are also political. That's for sure.
We have a question from the audience. To what extent can Italy realistically influence the EU's overall stance towards Azerbaijan? In particular, is it feasible for Italy to shift attitudes when key member states, especially France, hold significantly different and more influential positions?
Yeah, they're balancing, unfortunately, for example, France. France went, that's correct, in a different direction. I would say a bit too late. It would be nice if they've done maybe before the Second War, but okay, it's positive in any case. I think it's positive and it's also fair because it's to take responsibility of a disaster because, again, the Second Karabakh War was not only an Armenian disaster, it was a European disaster, in my opinion at least, because it showed that as Europeans, we are not able to avoid conflicts in a space that is Europe culturally. because Armenia, the South Caucasus in general, is Europe. Not only we are not able to protect minorities, that is something that is very important for our narrative, and I hope also for our ideas as Europeans, because we made the Shoah, we made horrible things with minorities, and now we pretend to be the good guys that are always caring about minorities. We didn't do it for Karabakh, and that's a huge mistake we've done. So yes, unfortunately, I think Italy is balancing. France is balancing also some movements that a part of German politics made in the direction of Armenia were just movements. It was not something like France. They didn't do so much concrete. But Italy has the leverage inside the European Union to have an influence because probably the third state after France and Germany, from economic point of view, from diplomatic point of view, and Italy, Hungary also, they are balancing the sympathy that a part of European politics, thanks God, had for Armenia, especially after the Second Karabakh War. But in the name of gas, in the name of economics, Italy is making much more difficult to have that. I made an article also that I think it's relevant, not because of my article, because what I found. In Europe, we made, after the Second Karabakh War, and that it's positive, a lot of resolutions condemning the ethnic cleansing. The European Parliament made at least 2 resolutions that named that, and it's very positive, I think, ethnic cleansing. For the prisoners, the Azeri prisoners that are now in the prisons because students, researchers, politicians, the Armenian hostages that are now in the prisons of Baku. There are plenty of documents that have been done on a European level and by member states, but no leverage. And again, we go back to the first point. Of course, it's something that is bad for Karabakh Armenians, for the hostages that are in a horrible situation. I mean, how can you be judged by a dictator? It's not possible. It's not fair at all. They shouldn't be there at all. They're political prisoners, in my opinion. But also for us, because we show to the world that what we promote is ideals. We are the good guys again. We Europeans are the good guys. We always say that. It's not true, unfortunately. I would like that it's true, but it's not true. Because we just speak, but we don't try any leverage in that direction. Because, okay, now we are weak as Europeans, but we are not that weak. We can have an influence. And they don't want to have an influence on that. They don't make real pressure on that. Instead, they buy more gas, more oil. So yes, Italy is a negative impact in that. We see it. And I'm worrying about that because it's making Italy weaker, Europe weaker, and our democracy is weaker, I believe.
Regarding the Vatican's interest in the South Caucasus and where it seems to be quite active, and I guess it's partly active because it has such a dynamic relationship with Azerbaijan. Does this go beyond to any of the other Turkic states, Central Asian republics? Do we see a relationship there as well, or no?
I don't know much about Central Asia. For sure, we saw a Vatican that was interest, for example, in China. For them, again, the post-Soviet countries are a bridge to try to reach China. That is a goal that the Catholic Church has, and we have also to consider. So yes, potentially yes. But for sure, they're ambitious. I mean, it's etymological. The Catholic Church means universal. So the role that that Catholic Church thinks they have is to be universal. Every state, every community, every country. That's the reason also for travels of popes. All the popes are traveling the world because they want to show again they are not a national church, they're not a European church, they're not a Western church, they're a universal church. So for sure, the post-Soviet countries and the post-socialist one, and the socialist one like China also, are a big dream of the Catholic Church. They worked a lot with Cuba on a very different level, for example, developing a strong relationship there. And they are, of course, willing to work with every country in that direction. And if I may add something, because I don't want to be really unfair, for example, when it came to my mind, it's a bit off topic, but I think it's also relevant for the audience. When I was filming a documentary in Armenia after the Second War, I saw, for example, the Caritas and the Catholic Armenians that were really helpful, trying to help Karabakh refugees. And that's also positive. I mean, I don't want to paint to make anyone the bad guy. Again, there are very active persons that are really trying to promote something. But again, this is a vertical state with a monarch, with a king, that is the Pope, actually, and they have their ambitions, and their ambitions are universal. So the South Caucasus is a part of a game that is a very big game for that, because it's a very old game.
What do you think might be some red lines for the Vatican Azerbaijan relationship? What might be a red line which the Vatican would take a strong position against actions taken by Baku, for example, or maybe even in Ukraine, or maybe somewhere else? What do you think? Either with Putin or so on. Where I mean, because look, I mean, even if we shift away from the South Caucasus and we look at Ukraine, the war has been waged and is in a very brutal manner, right? And yet we still see a bit of a balanced approach, right? These balanced approaches become quite problematic, right? So when do you think that might change? I mean, in terms of what would be an action where they could no longer, you think the forces within the inner, let's say, ecosystem of the Vatican, where those who think that we have to take the church has to take a stronger position against authoritarianism, when would their voices be amplified? When would they have a stronger voice, you think? Is it worth thinking about that? Is it worth thinking about supporting those? Let me make this a more meaningful question, less theoretical. What is the opportunity, and how should we be thinking about supporting those within the Catholic Church that have a problem with this relationship with authoritarian countries? What do we do to support those voices? Let me say.
Well, I can tell you something personal. Start from that. 1 year ago, I was in Kiev with a group of Catholics. I'm not part of the Catholic Church. I'm not, but I had a very positive experience going to Kiev with a group of Catholic pacifists that are very much sympathetic to the population there, and they developed beautiful projects. They bought ambulances there. They developed projects for children. They invited families to Italy for vacation, for relaxing after the war, after fighting. That's a beautiful part of the Catholic world that is not done only by the base, but also by some priests. There were priests there that were coming. And they're very active, and they're very active. They're wonderful persons, and I was very happy to go with them.
It is, Simone, but that's a different space, though, and that's a space. That's a very different space. So somehow, in fact, but we're talking about the diplomatic, political space where the church is also very much engaged, and God bless, those who sacrifice and take care of those who are in harm's way, and provide clothing and food and nourishment and aid. But that kind of activity also is very different. Let me say,
absolutely, I agree with you. There are two levels.
And perpetuating the condition. So one can try to deal with the symptoms while perpetuating the conditions that have created these symptoms, in essence. Absolutely. So, I mean, yeah.
I just made an article about that saying what you're saying exactly.
Yeah.
So that the Vatican diplomacy is legitimizing the autocracies, Russia, Belarus, and Azerbaijan. And, I believe you're right. There's no way. We saw it also with Pope Francis, I think. Some declarations of Pope Francis that they were trying, probably again, they were strategical. They were trying to build a bridge, a diplomatic bridge with Russia. But in my personal opinion, they were a disaster because they legitimized pro-Russian narrative into Italy. It was not the reason he did that. He did that, I think, was a clever diplomat because he wanted to find a role of the Vatican to try to find a way for peace. And maybe the intention was good. I think the intention was good, actually. But the result was a disaster, in my opinion. And not for the Vatican, again. It was a disaster for the European countries.
Hmm.
Because on a symbolic level, when you have a Pope that is saying, for example, I quote because he said in Italian, that NATO was barking at the borders of Russia, that when he was saying after 2022, that he was saying that Putin is a very cultivated person. He was saying these positive things also. I mean, what is the reason? And what it doesn't bring anything to
No.
peace. And we are just legitimizing narratives that are very toxic and that are entering in our veins. But again, we should watch at history. Their relationship between Vatican. We spoke with Italian fascism, that it was just the first of the fascism that we had in the world. But it continued with Franco in Spain. It continued with the
Mm.
dictatorship in South America. Vatican, a part of the Vatican, the hierarchy of the Vatican for sure worked very closely with this kind of dictatorship. And that's something that also admit themselves it was a mistake, but they didn't change their
No.
strategy. They're continuing on that, and that's damaging democracies in this moment. And I agree with you, it's a big problem.
Simone, may I ask you, we're going to end in a couple minutes. I know it's very late for you. What
Don't
time is
worry,
it?
it's not a
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. Okay, okay.
Don't worry.
Um, and I know you've traveled to Iran as well.
Mhm.
In your work, have you come across, what the contours look like between the Vatican and its relationship with Iran?
Oh, that was interesting. Yeah, I saw something about different Christian communities in Iran. I wrote also articles about that. I'm very interested in that topic. And yes, it's very interesting, for example, in the case of Iran, to make a comparison between the Catholic Church and their strategy there and some American evangelical churches. As you know, probably in the prisons of Iran, we had some figures, American Protestant figures, that were sent into prison there because they were trying to make something that is legal in Iran, that is to try to convert Muslims to Christianity. It's illegal in Iran. You can do it. But some American churches, at least, tried to do that. Of course, because they believe, it's their perspective. For them, it's important. If you think that Christianity is something that can save the world, you try to convert people. It's something that you always did. Of course, from the Iranian side, it's not acceptable. Being an authoritarian country, they put also in prison people that try to do that. What you notice is a big difference between this kind of approach and the Catholic Church there, because the Catholic Church is very much low profile level. They don't try to find a conflict with Iran. They try to promote dialogue. They try to avoid converting persons. I saw it also. And they try to work to protect their communities. For example, Assyrians communities that are very weakened also, or the part of Armenians that are Catholic. They work with them and they try to promote, and that's absolutely true. Their interest in
Mhm.
a situation that is very difficult because it is. But again, they're for sure not trying to develop any conflict or to try to criticize the government or the regime more exactly because of their human rights agenda. That's not something that the Vatican like to promote in any situation. So it's very interesting, I think, to compare these two different Christian approaches, a more uh, missionary one and the one of the Catholicism that is not at all trying to go in that two direction. Realpolitik, low level, and to be concrete and try to save what they have and to take care of the persons that are part of that church, but not to expand and not to enter into any conflict. That's something that you notice, and I think it's very interesting also.
Thank you, Simone. Simone, I mean, do you see the questions in the chat?
Yes, but there are many.
I'd like
Yes.
to give you a chance because some of them are similar, but if there are any that really stand out to you that you would like to answer in the remaining 2 or 3 minutes, if there's any one, I'd like to give you
Yes.
that chance.
Uh,
And many are similar.
okay. And sorry, but the elephant in the room. Okay, one is against Trump. Okay. How is now the stronger voice of morality and democracy in Europe? I think I gave an answer to that.
I think so.
We are not able to answer to Trump. We are not able to answer to Putin. We are not even able to answer to Aliyev or Erdogan in this moment, I think. We are just, it's a very, I think the majority of our audience is not living in Europe. I live in Europe. I'm living in Germany. That is probably the more fragile now situation, paradoxically, because a few years ago it was the opposite. Now it's the most fragile situation we have in Europe. Well, we are trying to keep together what we have and to save what we can save. We are not absolutely now to be able to be a strong voice of anything, I would say, because our contradictions are big, our divisions are huge, also in Germany. Germany is not too far, it's not far from Armenia now. I would say it's very similar. The division we have in German society now, it's very similar to the division we have in the Armenian society, political. AfD and the other parties, one against the other, no compromise, no possibility to comparison, to compromise, no possibility to dialogue even. We can't have a dialogue now. In this situation, we are not, we maybe pretend to be voice of morality and democracy, but we are just trying to save what we can save. I would say it's sad, but that's the reality. I can say another question that I think it's interesting. Also, I can't even read all of them probably, but I'm just
Yeah,
starting from. I say sorry if I don't give an answer to everyone. I think I'm sure
yeah,
that they are
sure.
very interesting. But do you think Turkey is playing a part in helping Azeris promote themselves and facilitating their efforts to gain influence within Europe? Yes, that's another point that we didn't touch. That's for sure true. Turkey is and was influential in Italy and in part also in the Vatican. We saw the visit also a few days ago. Uh,
Hmm.
so yes, Azerbaijan for sure learned from them, and they entered into a country using the context of Turkey. So Azerbaijan for sure had an advantage, and also in Germany.
But I don't
Uh,
think in any way, if I may say, I don't think we should ever underestimate Azerbaijan in terms of its ability to cultivate
Absolutely.
these relationships and use these
I agree with you.
relationships.
I
They
agree
seem
with
to
you.
do it exponentially, exponentially better than even Turkey does,
I agree with you, but if we go back in time, for example,
Hmm.
15 years ago, it was a different situation.
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
learned, and they learned, as I told you, they learned very well, and they're working extremely well.
They figured it out.
Because, yes, in Italy, you see how they work extremely well. A lot of publications, a lot of cultural
Yeah.
centers, a lot of books, a lot of uh, more practical things,
Yeah.
a lot of relationship they developed on many levels. And that was a very
Yeah.
careful work. And yes, at the beginning, I think it was an advantage to have the help of Turkey. Now I agree with you. They have their own agenda, and
Yeah. And they
they
have an
can work.
agenda, and it's an
Absolutely,
aggressive agenda
absolutely, absolutely.
as it pertains to Armenia.
Yes.
You know, well, Simone, I think we're going to end it on that, unless there is,
Okay.
unless there's one. Please, actually, I cut. Look, if there's something else that you want to answer, I I will let you decide. You're the one who I think it must be 1 in the morning, not
Don't worry,
not
don't worry.
nine.
No, 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 it's just
Okay.
half one. Half
Well, you've
one.
been very gracious. Thank you.
Estimate how much. Oh, they're asking me how much money Azerbaijan spends on influence in Italy. Well, it's not easy to quantify at all, but I can
Yeah.
tell you that's a lot of money. And that's a lot of money that they spent well, because not necessarily the two things go together. It's a lot of money
Mhm.
that they invested. I can tell you, for example, uh, different Italian universities took money from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan paid for having persons that were teaching Azeri language, Azeri culture, and to promote their agenda in different
Mhm.
universities in Italy.
Mhm.
They entered into the academic world, for example,
Mhm.
and they invested money on that. They invested money on publication and publishing houses. They created small cultural centers, even in the province in Italy. And yes, absolutely, they invested a lot of money. And they invested a lot of money that is not easy to understand in a country that has huge amount of corruption. And again, it's something that we don't have to underevaluate that. When the Soviet Union collapsed, as you know better than me, corruption was very strong, as it is now in many countries. When post-COVID Soviet countries entered into a system like Italy, they found something that was somehow familiar. Because Italy is, yes, is a democracy, but it's a democracy that has an amount of corruption that is not comparable to other democracies we have. Corruption is systematic in Italy. Corruption is everywhere in Italy. So when they entered there, they found something familiar and they started to work well in a system that was welcoming that feature of corruption. So it's a big topic, but and it's difficult also to trace because it goes into mafia, it goes into many levels, not only mafia, it goes into the politics. Italian politics has always been one of the most corrupted in the West. They found possibility to develop, and they did develop
Mhm.
a huge net with that. So yes, for sure they invested a lot of money, but I think from their perspective, they spent well their money because they got a lot. And I saw it. I mean, I repeat, in the last 11 years, I saw it growing year by year. 11
Yeah.
years ago, they were going on a much lower level. Now it's much bigger. So
Yes.
that's the
No.
biggest point, probably, of the story.
So it's important to support scholarship. I mean, is what it is.
Yes.
Both organizations that have sponsored tonight's talk are involved in research. NASA, has given, as I noted at the beginning of this talk, maybe 56 grants this year. This number is going to be increasing significantly, but we need to do much more. So I would encourage during this giving season, when you receive an email from either ISA or Nasser, to support it, because we have to counter the investments being made by malign forces with strong scholarship that represents just honest intellectual examination of issues, and this can happen. Um, and by doing so, what we do is we keep Armenian studies, and this is what Nasser has been doing for 70 years, just to kind of end also on this, is that it keeps Nasser at the intersection Nasser keeps Armenian studies at the intersection of then all these other studies, diaspora studies, European studies, economics, art, literature. So, and and shaping, and this in turn shapes discourse, right? There are no magic bullets to growing one's influence. It takes a lot of hard work, and the fact is that yes, Azerbaijan has resources, but the Armenian world also has plenty of resources, and the Armenian world also has friends who have resources. And we are very lucky for our friends. And Simone, I thank you for many years of work. Thank you for speaking truth to power.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
And thank you for all your work. We'll be sharing this recording, and we'll also be sharing links to your articles as well, so people can read more about your work. If we could end, I'd like to just end with maybe you telling us something about some of your work, other work moving forward, because we'd like to understand some of the issues and some of the things that you're doing and investigating. Simone, not related to this, doesn't have to relate to anything Armenian. If it is, great, but if not, please just tell us a little bit so we can get to know you a little bit better also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm working a lot on Germany now. I'm trying to follow Germany because it's, as I told you, a moment it is extremely interesting on one side, but it's also extremely dangerous on the other. I follow that, and I continue to follow Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus too. I'm also interested in Georgia. For example, tomorrow I will write an article about Georgia. That is something that is also very fast, because it's going very violent, and it's changing a lot, and it has big influence, of course, also on Armenia and on Europe too, I think, because once they can change Georgia into a stable regime, and they're going very close to that, are they stopping there? And Armenia will be surrounded by another regime? And how can Armenia as a democracy in that environment survive? And that's something also that I'm working on, because it's really dangerous, not only for Armenia, I think also for Europe. We are not thinking enough about that, because there are many connections, and we are trying to see sometimes things on a national level, but it's a mistake, because Europe is a system. If we fail all of us. The fact that we failed with the Second Karabakh War, I think it's something also many analysts and many journalists don't consider enough for Europe. Because the fact that we left an autocracy do with Karabakh what they did was also a message sent to Putin. It was a message sent to Erdogan that they can do whatever they want and nobody will move. And maybe it's not a domino effect exactly, it's not cause and consequence, but it's one of the causes that we are now in this situation. If I always say, if we really, as Europeans, worked on Karabakh with a real engagement, not with narratives saying nothing like we did for many years, we could have a chance to find a solution that was permitting this person to live in their house. It was nothing else, live in their villages, in their towns. If we had found a solution for that, then maybe we could have worked with Georgia, with Ukraine, with Donbass, with Abkhazia, with Ossetia. It was always the same problem. Why we didn't start with a smaller conflict, smaller with numbers, not smaller for importance, for numbers? Because, of course, Azerbaijan is not Russia, doesn't that military force, that money. Why we didn't really engage with Karabakh finding a solution? That would be, possibility we had to avoid this situation. And I think many persons are ignoring that. So to say, I'm avoiding your question, but
thank you.
I'm working with what I believe is important now, and I think everything is connected now. Everything is connected.
Thank you.
And working on that.
Thank you for connecting so many dots, Simone. Tonight,
so
as
much.
well as in your work overall. Everyone, have a great evening. Have a great rest of the week. Simone, again, thank you for your friendship and thank you for your work.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.